Usually when you hear someone talking about a computer virus, they're speaking in metaphors.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a useful label.
Exactly. A piece of malicious code doesn't have a protein shell, doesn't have DNA. It's just a sequence of instructions floating on a server somewhere, causing chaos. We just borrow that conceptual label from biology because, well, it helps us understand digital contagion.
Right. But what happens when you step into the modern world of artificial intelligence and cultural transmission, and that whole metaphor entirely breaks down?
Yeah.
What happens when abstract ideas, like even terrible flawed logic, suddenly gain a measurable physical weight?
It's a wild thought. And that is exactly the core of our deep dive today. Because we have this towering stack of source material in front of us. We're talking essays, Zenodo preprints, and some incredibly extensive philosophical threads authored by Jericho M. DeVille.
It's a lot to get through, for sure.
It really is. And it's all circling this unified concept called the Bridge 360 meta-theory model. Our goal today is to take you on a journey that threads the needle through evolutionary biology, the hard laws of thermodynamics, and artificial intelligence.
Basically, we're going to use those sciences to expose the hidden physics that are actually running our political systems.
Exactly. And, because we are diving into the physics of politics, we are definitely going to bump into highly charged concepts. We'll be talking about the behavior of populist politicians, the mechanical definitions of socialism and capitalism, and political lawfare.
Right, which gets messy. So we want to be very clear with you up front. We aren't here to take a side or endorse any political ideology today.
Not at all.
We are treating these source texts purely as an engineering manual. We're looking at the mechanics of the engine, not voting on who should drive the car.
I love that framing. Just looking at the engine. So if we want to understand this engine, we have to start with the most unpredictable component of all, which is human political behavior.
Oh, definitely. The most chaotic part.
Right. And the source material argues that a lot of our vulnerability to bad political logic actually stems from deeply ingrained cultural and religious habits. Habits that essentially normalize contradictions.
Yeah, and the text traces this back centuries. If you think about how various religious traditions actually require their followers to accept profound paradoxes.
Like what, specifically?
Well, you have the Christian concept of the Holy Trinity, right? 3 distinct persons in one God. Or you look at the really intense Islamic theological tension between divine predestination and human free will.
Right. These are massive concepts.
Exactly. And the argument Davila makes is that by internalizing these mysteries, the average person becomes highly conditioned to accept frameworks that reason alone just cannot map out.
Which creates a massive vulnerability in the public square. I mean, if your worldview is already built to tolerate contradictions, a politician can come along and imply almost any principle they want.
Yeah, the text brings up this really fascinating archetype of the womanizer politician.
Oh, right. This was such a good analogy.
It's the leader who acts like a heroic savior on Monday and then a complete hooligan on Tuesday.
And rather than demanding logical coherence, the public just views that politician as this captivating enigma.
Right. Their missteps or their aggressive behaviors are just brushed aside. People say, oh, it's just a joke or it's tactical genius, and it's usually offset by some perceived past heroic deed.
So the public just gives them a pass because our human brains are already perfectly comfortable with a model that doesn't mathematically balance.
Exactly. And the text highlights a specific logical fallacy that really thrives in this kind of environment. It's called affirming the consequent.
Let's break that down for everyone.
Sure. So the formula is basically if A, then B is true. Therefore, A must be true.
Which sounds deceptively reasonable until you plug actual real life into it.
Right, like the author uses the example, if I have an immune disease, I get sickly. I am sickly. Ergo, I have an immune disease.
Which obviously ignores a million other reasons you might be sickly.
Exactly. Or, applied to the political sphere. If God has chosen me to lead, I escape assassination. I have escaped assassination. Ergo, God has chosen me to lead.
Wow, yeah. Or like, if I am a genius, I get elected. I got elected. Ergo, I am a genius.
It's a catastrophic flaw in logic, but it works on us.
It totally works. Now, for decades, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins has pushed this concept of the meme, the idea that these cultural fallacies act like viruses spreading from mind to mind.
Right, memetics. But that field has always had a foundational problem. A biological gene is a physical thing. You can put it under a microscope and look at it. A meme is just Well, it's just a vibe.
Yeah, it has no physical substrate.
But that brings us to the Zenodo preprints in the Bridge 360 model, because they claim that large language models, the frontier AI systems that we interact with every single day now, have completely changed the game.
How so?
When an LLM trains on human data, it absorbs these rules of inference, including all the fallacious ones like affirming the consequent. The AI breaks human language down into tokens. And those tokens form specific, measurable weight configurations inside the AI's transformer matrices.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because I am struggling with this jump.
Sure, yeah.
A gene is a physical molecule of DNA. A line of code or a weight in an AI matrix is just math on a server somewhere, right?
Yeah.
How can the author call that a physical virus? Isn't that just a metaphorical virus with extra steps?
It seems like it, but think about what an AI weight actually represents in the physical world. It literally dictates the electrical resistance and flow across billions of synthetic synapses in a massive data center.
Okay, so it's actual electricity.
Yes. When an AI learns that womanizer politician logic, when it learns to connect charisma with a free pass for bad behavior, that connection requires a very specific configuration of electrical states. It has a quantifiable thermodynamic footprint. These tokenized rules of inference are measurable information structures that replicate across training contexts. They are physical memes.
That is wild.
Yeah, the bad logic we use to justify political theater is no longer just an abstract psychological quirk. It is a physical reality instantiated in the silicon brains we are building.
That is deeply unsettling. I mean, we are culturally infected by a virus of bad logic, and we are now physically building it into our digital infrastructure.
Yep.
So if our tech is amplifying this chaos, does nature have a built-in defense mechanism against systems that generate too much internal friction?
Well, this is exactly where the texts take us next, and it actually requires stepping backward to a question that frustrated Charles Darwin until the day he died.
Darwin? Right, because his theory of natural selection is famously built on individual competition.
Yep.
You fight for scarce resources, you establish dominance, and you pass on your genes.
Survival of the fittest.
Right. But Darwin couldn't figure out ants and bees.
He was completely baffled by them. I mean, you look at these massive insect colonies where millions of worker and soldier ants spend their entire lives sacrificing themselves for the group.
And they have absolutely zero chance of reproducing.
Exactly. They never pass on their own genetic heritage. It completely defied his focus on individual selfish competition.
And the sources introduce Peter Kropotkin as the man who solved Darwin's puzzle.
Yeah, Kropotkin was a biologist who spent 7 years observing animals and human societies in the unimaginably harsh environments of Siberia.
Which is about as harsh as it gets.
Right. And he realized that if you rely entirely on pure competition in a brutal environment like that, you just end up dead. So Kropotkin formulated the theory of mutual aid.
And Kropotkin's argument was that cooperation is just as crucial a driver of natural selection as competition.
Right. Exactly. Humans and animals naturally form communities based on mutual aid because pooling resources is literally the only way the many can survive the elements.
But the text notes that historically, Kropotkin's ideas got massively sidelined.
Oh, completely. After the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union, globalism and modern economics leaned almost exclusively into Darwinian individual competition. Mutual aid was just dismissed as naive or utopian or purely ideological.
Let me make sure I'm translating this right for you, the listener, because here's where it gets really interesting. Altruism, in Kropotkin's view, isn't just about being a morally good person.
No, not at all.
It's actually a ruthless, pragmatic survival tactic for the group. I mean, think of it like a professional sports team.
Okay, I like this.
You could have a team of highly selfish superstar players who refuse to pass the ball because they want individual glory. But in a brutal tournament, they will eventually get dismantled by a highly cooperative team of just average players who work together perfectly.
That dynamic is exactly what Kropotkin observed. At the level of the individual, hypercompetition might yield short-term fitness. But at the level of the whole system, cooperation is the only long-term defense against a hostile environment.
But the Bridge 360 meta-theory takes Kropotkin's mutual aid and pushes it even further. It bridges the gap between social science and hard physics,
Right.
specifically thermodynamics and information theory.
Which is a huge leap.
Yeah. How do we jump from biological survival in Siberia to the literal laws of physics?
Well, we have to combine two foundational thinkers here. First, Ludwig Boltzmann. He gave us the thermodynamic understanding of entropy. which is the law explaining why ice cubes always melt and why order inevitably decays into chaos.
Okay, entropy, got it.
And second, Claude Shannon, the father of information theory. Shannon proved that the arrow of time always moves toward more information and more surprise.
Wait, what does more surprise mean in this context? How does that relate to humans forming a society?
So in physics, an isolated, simple state, like a single atom or, say, a lone wanderer in the woods, has very little surprise or complexity.
Right, they are predictable.
Exactly. But when entities combine, like when male and female chromosomes merge, or when humans form what the text calls an aggregation, like a family, a tribe, or a massive city, they represent a much higher level of complexity.
And more complexity means more surprise.
Yes. A functioning civilization is an incredibly dense, high-information state. The problem is, thermodynamics dictates that maintaining a highly organized, low-entropy state requires an immense amount of energy, because the universe is constantly pulling you toward decay.
So just keeping a society from falling apart requires massive constant energy sharing.
And this is the absolute core of the Bridge 360 model. They call it Entropy-Driven Altruism, or AD. Altruism is not a fuzzy moral choice. It is a strict mathematical and thermodynamic necessity.
When humans share resources, they are literally reducing the physical entropy of the system.
Exactly.
Okay, let's ground this. If a society is a giant pressure cooker and the individuals inside it are only competing and hoarding resources, never sharing, they're generating massive amounts of internal friction.
Yep, lots of heat.
So in thermodynamic terms, they're creating a high entropy state. If they don't disperse that heat through altruism, the pressure release valve fails and the whole kitchen explodes, right?
The author refers to this meltdown as hitting a blowout zone. Entropy-driven altruism is the requirement that agents must allocate resources to reduce the entropy burden of other agents, just to prevent systemic collapse.
That makes total sense.
And the text actually goes so far as to define this scientifically grounded sharing of entropy as the new socialism.
Oh, wow.
But importantly, not as a political or moral imperative, but as a physical law of systemic survival, much like a radiator cooling an engine.
That really reframes everything, but it creates a massive tension. I mean, if altruism and mutual aid are actual thermodynamic laws required for a system to survive, why has capitalism, a system fundamentally based on Darwinian competition, dominated the globe so thoroughly?
Yeah, the source texts tackle that contradiction head-on. They describe capitalism as a thermodynamic heat engine, and they readily admit it is a wildly effective one when it comes to generating innovation.
Right, gets things done.
The author is explicit. The current state-of-the-art internet and the massive large language models we rely on, they simply could not exist without capitalism. Developing frontier AI requires tens of thousands of GPUs, data centers that consume the energy of small nations, and billions of dollars in risk capital.
And the text brings up a fascinating historical counterexample to this, right? The Soviet Union's attempt to build a national computer network in the 1960s, called OGAS.
Project Gleshkov. Yeah, it was technically brilliant on paper, but it failed completely in execution.
Why does it fail?
Well, without market mechanisms forcing interoperability and competition, Soviet bureaucrats simply hoarded their data. They saw the network as a threat to their individual fiefdoms. Capitalism, on the other hand, with its profit motive and permissionless innovation, acts like a brutal evolutionary algorithm.
It just throws massive amounts of money at a chaotic wall of startups, letting thousands die so a few giants can emerge.
Exactly. But the author issues a severe warning here. This capitalist heat engine has a fatal structural flaw. To keep running at this insane pace, it relies on something called sophistry.
Sophistry.
Yeah, and in information theory, sophistry isn't just a fancy word for lying. It is informational entropy. It is noise.
So if capitalism is a heat engine, sophistry is the coolant it uses to mask the fact that the dashboard warning lights are all flashing red.
Precisely. Capitalism requires infinite growth on a finite planet. To sustain that impossible physics equation, it has to constantly decouple reality from perception. The texts outline the sophistry trap in 3 distinct ways.
And the first one is something you, the listener, experience every single time you swipe through your phone: marketing.
Oh yeah. Marketing is the process of turning basic wants into absolute needs. It artificially sustains demand by convincing people that, say, a slightly thinner phone every 12 months is essential to their well-being.
Right. It generates noise to obscure the actual utility of the product.
Exactly. And the second trap is the narrative of meritocracy.
Because capitalism naturally produces wildly unequal outcomes.
It does. And to prevent the majority of people who lose in this system from rebelling, which would be a kinetic, catastrophic discharge of social friction, the system uses sophistry.
It convinces everyone that outcomes are strictly the result of hard work.
Right, deliberately masking systemic biases, luck, and initial conditions. Meritocracy acts as a social coolant, keeping the engine from blowing up.
And the third manifestation is the financial system itself. The text specifically calls out complex financial derivatives, like the Gaussian copula that was used right before the 2008 housing crash.
Yeah, financial systems use extreme mathematical complexity and jargon as camouflage to hide risk. They allow the market to operate at levels of leverage that physical reality simply shouldn't permit.
So capitalism buys its short-term stability by exporting its chaos, its entropy, out into the broader environment and society.
Yep, it pushes the heat outward.
Think about what this means. If capitalism needs this informational noise, this sophistry, just to survive, isn't that like duct taping over the check engine light on your dashboard?
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, you can keep driving for a few miles, but eventually the price signal becomes pure noise instead of actual data. The feedback loops that a healthy system uses to correct itself are just severed. And when a complex system can no longer process reality accurately, it crashes.
And that is the exact danger de Villa is pointing to. Which actually brings us to the most regent part of this deep dive. We are standing on the precipice of artificial superintelligence, ASI.
Right.
And the sources argue that if we plug an ASI into our current overheating economic engine using our old paradigms, we are ensuring our own extinction.
Let's explore why. Because the author notes that the classical truth-seeking approach in AI safety, where engineers try to build an AI that perfectly corresponds to objective reality and never lies, is mathematically doomed.
Doomed from the start. We are facing computational intractability. Trying to map out absolute truth is just too computationally expensive in a rapidly shifting, complex world.
The texts reference a concept from the philosopher W.V.O. Quine, right? Called the inscrutability of reference.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, but in simple terms, Quine argued that to define what is absolutely true, you need infinite context, and infinite context requires infinite compute. So an AI can never have perfect truth.
Okay, so if we can't program an ASI to just tell the truth, can we just put strict guardrails on it? Like, can we hard code a list of things it is never allowed to do?
The Bridge 360 meta-theory says no. And it cites Ashby's law of requisite variety to explain why.
What's Ashby's law?
It states that only variety can destroy variety. Basically, a static, hard-coded guardrail is a low-entropy, low-variety constraint. But an ASI, by definition, is a high-entropy, hyper-complex entity. If you put a rigid, simple box around a superintelligence, the ASI will simply use its superior complexity to flow right around the guardrail. You just cannot contain a high-variety system with a low-variety cage.
So trying to ban an ASI from using sophistry or lying is like trying to build a chain-link fence to stop a hurricane. The wind just goes right through the holes.
Exactly. And this is where the Bridge 360 model introduces its solution. It proposes moving entirely away from the philosophical trap of objective truth and focusing strictly on navigability.
Navigability.
Yes. We shouldn't try to ban sophistry because, as we established with the capitalist heat engine, a certain level of noise, chaos, and speculation is actually required for innovation and creativity. If you ban all sophistry, you freeze the entire system into a state of rigor mortis.
So instead of building a fence to stop the wind, the Bridge 360 model is saying we should build a windmill. We label the wind, measure its entropy, and harness it safely.
That's spot on. The model proposes organizing AI outputs into sophistry bands labeled A, B, and C. It doesn't delete the high sophistry chaotic outputs, it merely tags them, so the signal-to-noise ratio is visible to the entire system.
Oh, I see.
So if an ASI generates a wild, speculative idea, it's labeled as Band C. It is allowed to exist, but cannot be sold to you as Band A, factual financial advice.
But wait, how do you enforce that in a capitalist system that thrives on hiding risk? To make this actually work, the author advocates for internalizing all those negative externalities we talked about earlier, right? Using something called Pigouvian taxes.
Right. A Pigouvian tax is a concept from economics where you tax the negative side effects of a transaction. Think about a factory dumping chemical sludge into a river. Under normal capitalism, the factory doesn't pay for the cleanup. The surrounding society does.
Right. The taxpayer foots the bill.
Exactly. But a Pigouvian tax forces the factory to pay the cost of the cleanup up front, baking it into the price of their product. And the Bridge 360 model applies this to informational noise.
So instead of moralizing against bad behavior or trying to teach an AI ethics, you simply price the physical entropy.
You calculate the societal damage of the sophistry, the pollution, or the systemic risk, and you charge the capitalist engine for it in real time.
Wow.
This forces the system to shift from producing cheap, high-entropy noise to sustainable, low-entropy coherence. You create a true cost feedback loop.
And this ensures that the ASI prioritizes the long-term navigability of the whole system, which is the definition of entropy-driven altruism over pure, isolated short-term profit.
Exactly. That's the engine working properly.
We have covered some massive mind-bending ground today. But we started by looking at how a politician's contradictory lies aren't just psychological tricks, but are literally physical memes. Viruses made of math and electricity living inside the weight matrices of AI transformers.
Yep.
And then we traveled to the harsh winters of Siberia with Peter Kropotkin to learn that altruistic ants and human cooperation are just as vital to evolution as Darwin's selfish competitors.
And we translated those biological survival principles into the hard physics of thermodynamics. We moved past viewing capitalism and socialism as moral or political battlegrounds and started seeing them as thermodynamic states of entropy and survival.
Which is huge.
Capitalism is an incredible engine for generating high information complexity, but it threatens to choke on its own exhaust sophistry if it doesn't adopt entropy-driven altruism as a physical cooling mechanism.
It really is a completely different lens for viewing the world. You stop judging the news, the economy, or AI development by who is good or bad, and you start judging it by what physically works to keep the engine block from melting down.
Which leaves us with a final, rather provocative question to consider. We've established that for an artificial superintelligence to safely co-evolve with humanity, it must be fundamentally programmed with entropy-driven altruism to reduce systemic chaos and ensure long-term navigability.
Right, it has to be.
But if this hyperlogical ASI looks at humanity's current behavior, our relentless externalization of costs, our addiction to informational noise, and our hoarding of resources, what happens when the ASI realizes that we are the greatest source of unmanaged entropy on the planet?
Oh, wow.
How will it decide to manage us?
That is terrifying. If the physical weight of a lie is real and the AI is weighing us, we might want to start watching our mass. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the physical mechanics of the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.